President Trump's govern by tweet approach just got a lot tougher. Social media giants cracking down on the president's online accounts after his inflammatory rhetoric encouraged supporters to storm the U.S. Capitol in protest of the election. Twitter has announced they've permanently suspended the president from their platform due to a risk of further incitement of violence. They say his latest tweets were a violation of its glorification of violence policy. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg wrote that Facebook and Instagram will ban Trump's account from posting for at least the remainder of his term in office, perhaps indefinitely. This sort of rhetoric from the president has been allowed to stand online for years, but a deadly insurrection at the Capitol is where these companies are drawing the line. It's also worth mentioning that these restrictions coincide with the timing of another key political event, and that is that Republicans just lost power in the Senate. This social media standoff with the president has provoked a debate among legal scholars over whether the constitutional protection of free speech has itself become a threat to democracy. So, are social media platforms taking the correct approach by silencing the president's posts? Joining me now to discuss is Jeffrey Stone, a leading First Amendment scholar, a professor at the University of Chicago Law School. Professor, some get loose with their language. Not every dispute about speech is a First Amendment issue. Can you explain that?
The First Amendment, like other provisions of the Constitution, applies only to government, whether federal or state or local. It does not apply to private actors. So the New York Times cannot violate anyone's First Amendment rights, and nor can Facebook or Twitter. They are private entities. So the First Amendment itself simply does not apply to the actions of private organizations, whether it be Newsweek or CNN or Twitter.
Thank you for clarifying. The C word, censorship, comes with a heavy connotation. Is this censorship?
Well, it is censorship of a sort. If censorship means not allowing someone to speak in a particular context because one disapproves of the message that the individual will communicate. But on the other hand, it's important to understand that censorship of that sort is common in media. I have no right to be on CNN. Donald Trump has no right to have his speech quoted or transposed in the New York Times. All of those entities, whether it be newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, cable, they all have complete discretion to decide for themselves what to broadcast or what to print or what not to broadcast and to print. Now, you can call that censorship if you wish, but that's part of making decisions to decide how to use limited resources. What makes social media different is that they are not limited in the same way. CNN has only so many hours in the day. The New York Times has only so many pages in each issue. But in theory, Twitter or Facebook can have essentially limitless numbers of people do whatever they want on those venues. And therefore, they're in a different position. They don't have to engage in censorship in the same way that realistically TV, radio, magazines, and newspapers do. So in that sense, they're making decisions that they don't have to make because of limited resources. And in that sense, they're making substantive choices that are not necessarily required by the realities of the method of communication, unlike radio, TV, and newspapers.
Recognizing, as you said, that they are private actors, there's not a First Amendment issue per se here, they can do whatever they like, I'm unsettled by it for several reasons. One is, I think double standards are guaranteed. There's no way that the tech companies can police all of their platforms of all of their content. So it's inevitable, it seems to me, that someone's going to get singled out, others will not get singled out, and you know the conservatives believe that they're victims right now of bias by Silicon Valley. How do you react to that issue?
Well, I think that one of the realities of social media that was not fully anticipated when it came into existence was that individuals would use it in ways that, in fact, are objectively highly problematic, and that if the social media owners simply left well enough alone and let anyone say whatever they wanted, that would create a broad range of problems. Social media is insulated from liability by Section 230 in a way that the New York Times and CNN are not. So if CNN broadcasts something that constitutes libel, they can be held liable for having done so. Under existing law, Facebook and Twitter cannot. They have been given immunity from that liability. And the reason for that was to essentially turn social media into the equivalent of a huge public park in which anyone can simply go onto the park, say whatever they want, no one would interfere, and the park owners would not be held liable for anything anyone said. What's happened, though, over time is that those who operate social media have come to realize that this can be abused in serious ways. And the question is, to what extent should they monitor that and limit what people are allowed to say? And this has to do with obscenity, it has to do with hate speech, and now it has to do with speech that can incite violence and criminal conduct. And I think these social media outlets are wrestling with how to deal with these questions. And we've reached a point, I think, where government has to sit down and try to figure out, is there a way for government to play a role here without becoming censors itself? Because that's even more dangerous. But what we have at the moment is a problem. The idea that Facebook or Twitter can decide whether Joe Biden can speak or whether Donald Trump can speak or whether Senator Hawley can speak or whatever, raises a serious problem. It gives them a power that's much greater than CNN or New York Times. And we have to figure that out.
I want to get a quick reaction from you to something that former First Lady Michelle Obama said, quote, "Now is the time for Silicon Valley companies to stop enabling this monstrous behavior and go even further than they have already by permanently banning this man from their platforms and putting in place policies to prevent their technology from being used by the nation's leaders to fuel insurrection." Your reaction is what, Professor Stone?
Well, to use their social media platforms to, quote, fuel insurrection, literally, it makes sense for them not to permit that, in the same way that New York Times and CNN would not permit that. On the other hand, that's a very ambiguous concept. And the problem with it is it puts enormous discretion in the hands of these social media platforms. And so I guess I would say that we need rules that are clearly defined. And it might be that government has to play a role here. It's a little bit like when radio came into existence and the government passed legislation to give the government the power to regulate with the Federal Communications Commission, the Fairness Doctrine, and so on. It may be that similar types of regulation, and now we may have come to realize is necessary with respect to social media. The danger, of course, is government intervention is problematic because government can abuse their power. Imagine if Donald Trump had the power to dictate what speech would be permissible or not permissible on Facebook. I'm quite sure Michelle Obama would not want that to be the state of the law.
I agree. Professor Stone, thank you. That was excellent. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime, Michael.